Hello, and welcome to episode 27 of Charlotte Mecklenburg History with Dan Morrill. Today is Sunday, September 20th, 2020, and I am Dan's daughter, Mary Dana, here with Dan through Zoom. Hey, Dad.
Hey, everybody, and hey, Mary Dana, it's wonderful to see you. It
Thanks for
always
joining us.
is.
Oh, yeah, it's great. And thanks everybody for joining us today. And let's see, my dad today said he's going to be talking about firefighting in Charlotte, the history of fighting fires in Charlotte, part one, right? So you're not even going to attempt to do it.
Definitely part one, and I'm just going to kind of take a leisurely pace.
Well, it's your show. That's what
It
I
is.
always say. It's your show. You do it how you
And I
want to do
don't
it.
get paid, and you don't get paid.
That's right. We're just doing this for fun. So we're just
Right,
going to have fun. And thanks
right.
for joining us to have some fun with us. That's what I say. I always enjoy hearing from our viewers. They've shared a lot of really great information and
They do.
comments.
They
So
do.
thank you so much. You can friend my dad on Facebook. You can follow him on Instagram, Dan Morrill, and you can email him,
I've
Dan
got my
Morrill.
email address on the bottom of the page. See
Oh
it?
yeah, if you're watching us on YouTube, it's the bottom of the page. Dan Morrill, the number 2 at gmail.com. Okay, Dad, take it away.
Well, I want to say a few things up front. I want everybody to understand this is not an official publication of Preserve Mecklenburg. It's my publication. It's Mary Dana's publication. And obviously we want to promote Preserve Mecklenburg, but what I say is not an official representation of Preserve Mecklenburg. And every week I get a total of how many people have supported Preserve Mecklenburg. And it's usually about 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we get over 100 people who watch this podcast.
That's
And
sometimes several hundred.
I have the deepest respect for all of you to support what you want to support. That's your business and it's not my business. But the thing that really fires me up, and I'm a historian, but I'm not primarily interested in writing books or journal articles. I'm primarily interested in reaching out to the community. And one of the ways you can reach out to the community is to care about what our community looks like. And I, of course, believe that the built environment, the way that we arrange our cities, including those things that remind us of yesterday, are so important in the quality of life. Otherwise, I wouldn't do what I do. And the reality is that the only way Preserve Mecklenburg can achieve its full potential is for people to support it. Most private nonprofits get about 60% of their basic operating funds from members. And what we're trying to do is to build a preservation community. There's never really been a preservation community. This evening at 7 o'clock, I'm going to be hosting a Zoom meeting for supporters of Preserve Mecklenburg in order to try to build that community. Now, I thought I'd just give one illustration. Somebody might think it's a little bit stupid, but I'm going to show you what you pay for a Wendy's spicy chicken sandwich. You pay $1.89. I put a slash. I should have put a period. Same thing true in the other. And annual membership from PMI costs you about $2.08.3. So you might just keep that in mind. And you can do it so easily. All you have to do is to go to preservemec.org/donate. And you can make your donation. You'll get a letter from the official website, and I will send you a letter. And then, of course, you can participate in our Zoom meetings. And we're also working on a gift for our supporters. So, just give it a thought. You do what you want. But I want to make a couple of
But
corrections.
I want to say this. I would also say to everyone that if maybe you're not in a position to give some financial, contributions, to spread the word. Do you know what I mean? Like, tell your friends and your family and tell other people about Preserve Mecklenburg, and so that people become aware of it.
Well, that's one of the big reasons to do these podcasts, to try to spread that word and to build up a membership base, because then they can spread the word to other prospective members. So that you're absolutely right,
That's
Mary.
right. I mean, it's a grassroots organization, and that's how.
And that's really, I'm a big supporter of these big foundations and all of that, but nothing beats a grassroots organization. I
And
mean,
that's what Preserve
that's
Mecklenburg
what this
is.
is. It is grassroots. But if the grass doesn't grow, we can't keep going.
Yeah, and we
So
need people to
anyway,
spread the word. So thank you so much to
yep,
for
absolutely.
telling people. Okay, Dad, sorry. Okay.
Couple of
Corrections.
corrections from last week. I gave the wrong death date in one place for Albert Barnes Cameron, who did that wonderful house on Merwick Circle. He died in 1967, 1947. I did give it correctly in one place, but I gave it wrong in another.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I gave the wrong birth year for Paul Braswell. I said he was born in 1913. He was born in 1933. Paul Braswell, of course, was a very talented architect. And as I say, I knew him personally, and he was really a great friend. I also I got a notification that I had made the statement that the only former Phillips 66 service station with that gargantuan triangular canopy sticking out like a sword was on the plaza. There is also one still remaining on Central Avenue. It's at 4732 Central Avenue. So I'm glad we've got two rather than one. So I wanted to correct that. So now this is a big subject, and it's very, very complicated and significant. But no, Mary Dana, when you start thinking about macro terms, big terms about human life, I remember a great line from The King and I, the movie, that Yul Brynner said. It's a puzzlement. I mean, here we are out on this planet in the midst of this absolutely gargantuan universe, and we live so briefly. I don't know how many human beings have lived to be 120, but not very many. And life is precarious, and you think about the things that unite us. Well, one of the things that unite us is fire. There's a great line about fire. Fire is a great friend and a horrible enemy. And fire is just, it's just so frightening when it gets out of control. Look what's happening in California.
California, right?
I co-produced a video about a man who lived down, named Thompson, young man who lived down here on, Raymond Thompson was his name, who lived down here on Cherokee Road in Eastover, and he was killed in the Man Gulch fire, which was sort of a major forest fire in Montana in the late 1940s. And I just can't think of anything that's worse than being burned to death. And you have to understand that Charlotte, like all cities, faced fire as a huge danger. Now, I gave the population of Charlotte. Charlotte was established as a courthouse town. It was the man who really laid it out was a man named Thomas Polk. And when Mecklenburg County was established in 1763, there wasn't a courthouse town. And when Mecklenburg County was first established, it included a large portion of what is now Cabarrus County and Union County. And there were a lot of Lutherans living up in that part of the county. And Thomas Polk wanted to make sure that the courthouse town was in the center of the Scots-Irish portion of the county. And so literally, he laid out the town. And many people don't realize, you know, when they go to Winston-Salem and they go to Old Salem, they say, oh man, this place is really old. Charlotte's older. Its built environment's changed a lot more than Old Salem, but it was established in 1768 when Thomas Polk saw that. And of course, Charlotte was named after the Queen of George III. And Tryon Street, its main major thoroughfare, was named for the royal governor. So that's how Charlotte got started. And essentially, Charlotte was not the center of population. Now, you can see there were 717 people in Charlotte in 1830. Now, that's about the same amount of people that presently live in McAdenville. Now, I'm not saying that Charlotte was an inconsequential place, because there was no community in Charlotte that was more than 4,000 people.
What, you mean in North Carolina?
In North Carolina is what I meant, I'm sorry to say. So I'm not saying it was an inconsequential place, but it was a small place. What's also true, and I'm going to show you a pretty bad map in a minute. I just couldn't get a good picture of it, but I think it'll still be useful. Another thing was everything was walking scale. There were no automobiles. There were no locomotives. Literally, you had three ways to get from one place to another. You could walk, you could ride a horse, or you could get pulled by a horse. I mean, that was really basically it. And as late as the 1840s, in order for you to travel from Charlotte to Raleigh, which by then, of course, had become the state capital, it took 5.5 days. And that was if everything went well. 5.5 days. Took you 1 day to get to Salisbury.
Mm-hmm.
The next day you got to Salem. And then you headed east for 3.5 more days to get to Raleigh. So it was a very isolated place. Now, because you had to walk everywhere, towns were very concentrated. They were very clustered together. And they were also built almost universally out of wood. Now, this building here is a facsimile of what was the original Mecklenburg County courthouse, which would have been at the intersection of what we know as Trade and Tryon Street. I tell you this is a bad map, but I think it does illustrate a point.
Yeah.
I know it's bad. I can't do anything about it.
It's okay.
This map's from 1877. Now, the town really changed October 28th, 1852, because you see this red arrow over here.
Mm-hmm.
See this one? That's where the railroad came in 1852. And if you notice, the white arrow points to the intersection of Trade and Tryon Street. And you notice everything was more or less east toward the railroad track. Very little over here on the western side of what's now uptown Charlotte. Everything's over here going toward the railroad track right here.
Mm-hmm.
Also, now here is the United States Mint Building. Now, the United States Mint Building was remember, this is 1877. So this side of town's not populated much at all. That was the biggest, the most imposing and significant building in town. But notice what's here. See how everything is clustered right together?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why fire was so incredibly dangerous. So, and you know, when you think about fires, and I'll get to this article in a minute, you know, everybody hears about the Chicago fire.
Right.
London virtually burned completely up in 1666. Charleston, South Carolina was known as the city of fires. Fire was a horrific, horrible danger because there are essentially three things that are needed in order to fight a fire. You have to have organization because it's a team effort. You obviously have to have training. There's a tremendous amount of equipment that's going to be necessary for firefighting, and it's teamwork. People have different jobs. There has to be a lot of training. They do a lot of practicing. And then you've got to have equipment. Now, this article here appeared in the earliest newspapers we have from Charlotte from the 1830s. This is the Miners and Farmers Journal of April 30th, 1835. And it says the fire company will meet on the first Saturday in May next at 4 o'clock at the courthouse. And they're going to elect their officers. Now, what does that tell us? That tells us that by 1835, there was a fire company. Now, this is very important for people to understand about firefighting. There was no municipal fire department in Charlotte until 1887. All fire companies were made up of volunteers. Now, the city did buy the equipment, the hoses, the hooks, the ladders, the fire engines, the various things that were needed for firefighting. But these were in essence not given, but they were loaned to these volunteer fire companies. Now, the way it would work, there would be a bell. I don't know exactly where the bell was. I think it was moved at various places. I think probably first it was at the courthouse, but it was moved around. When somebody spotted a fire, they would run and ring that bell. And the bell, of course, would signal to this volunteer fire company that they had to go to where their equipment was, come to the fire, and try to deal with it. So we know that by 1835, there was indeed at least, and I think at this time, only one volunteer fire company that was operating in Charlotte. Now I'm going to read this because now let me show you what the reality was. There's a word up there called providence has again favored. Here's what it says below. Providence has again favored us as the night was calm, or else we might have had to record a more destructive fire. Now here's the reality. There's several variables with fire. Well, one of the big ones is wind.
Mm-hmm.
The reason these California fires are so absolutely devastating, these wildfires, is because of the wind, high wind. When you have wind, fires spread. So here, this would have been in 1840. You see, this was in the Charlotte Journal, October 1st, 1840. What happened was there was a fire that broke out in a blacksmith shop. Now, you know, one of the things that's true about these towns, there's a lot of fire around because there are a lot of horses around. And those horses had to have horseshoes.
Right.
And of course, when you think about a blacksmith shop, you see a forge. So a lot of times these fires would just break out. And they're basically what they're saying here is obviously the fire company would have responded to this fire in 1840. And I'll talk in a minute about how they responded. But the only thing that saved them was the wind didn't blow. Because you notice I showed you all those concentrations of buildings right around Trade and Tryon Street.
Mm-hmm.
They were cheek to jowl one with the other. They didn't have side yards. The buildings literally connected to each other. And so the whole damn town could burn up. You know, I mean, it was just really, fire was so frightening. Now, this is a very interesting article here because this is from 1842. And what's really interesting about it is this fire company by 1842 has a fire engine. Now, you think about well, Mary Dana, what do you think when you see a fire?
Mm-hmm.
Fire's burning, and it's a bad fire. It's a fire that you don't want. What's the natural reaction of most people? What do they want to put on that fire?
Water.
Yes. Now, a fire engine is essentially a device that allows you to throw water on a fire without actually walking up right to the fire itself. The earliest forms of firefighting were bucket brigades, where they would go to a well that was close by, and they would line up a whole bunch of people, and they would put water in one bucket and hand it to the next person, bucket, and then, but you had to get so close to the fire to throw it. So there was naturally a desire to want to get fire engines. Now, these fire engines, a lot of people, when they think about fire engines, you know, they think about what we think of today. And by the way, the city tried to control fire by passing ordinances, telling people, you know, April 15th, 1831, Charlotte passed an ordinance ordering residents not to light fires in their chimneys in dry weather, because chimneys were one of the big causes of fire, okay? And look down near the bottom. In April 1859, Charlotte decreed that no person shall keep or suffer to be kept any hay, straw, fodder, shavings, or other combustible matter in any building where fire is kept constantly, like a blacksmith shop.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have any hay in a blacksmith shop. So there is this constant fear of fire. Now, these are the earliest fire engines. Now, a lot of people, when they think of fire engines, and I'm sure the volunteer fire company.
I also see where you put a picture of a bucket brigade.
Well, I'll give you how that's connected. Are you finding this interesting, by the way?
Yeah, you know, I think about what I've really thought about is how we don't think about fire in the threat of fire in our daily lives as much as people used to. I mean, you think about all these ordinances they passed and how important it was. And so they really put a lot of thought into the threat of fire 200 years ago, that today we just sort of say, oh, well, we'll just call 911 or grab a fire extinguisher. And we don't live with that constant.
You have so many good insights.
So
now, when that company went to that volunteer fire company, heard the bell, they would have had stored in a building a fire engine that looked something like this. Now, when this is called a piano-style fire engine, and a lot of people, when they think of fire engines, they think of something with an internal combustion engine in it. They think of a fire truck.
Mm-hmm.
This, first of all, was pulled to the fire by people. And the brake system on the fire engine was people. They hooked them up to the front. Men would run. There'd be another group of men behind with a tow line. That's kind of like, you know, pulling back and forth. And when they had to go forward, the men in the front pulled. And when they had to stop, they told the men in the back pull. Kind of like, you know, tug a rope. Anyway. Now, the fire engine was operated by men standing on either side of the fire engine and pushing these handles up and down. Now, the reason I showed this, the way originally that they got water, this would have been like a basin. It would have been a container. They would go get water, go over and pour it into this basin. And there would be a hose that would come out, go into that basin with a suction pump to suck water in, and then there would be people throwing it on the fire. So that's what these fire engines. Now this, I think, will really illustrate it well. This is a typical piano style. You called it piano because the men stood on the side
Oh,
of the fire engine. Some fire engines, those handles are at the end, but this is called piano style. Now you see the man here on the with this arrow, the red arrow, he's actually throwing the water on the fire. So he doesn't have to go right up to it with a bucket. He can throw it up on the fire. This man back here with the blue arrow, his job is to get the water to the fire engine. Now, at first, they would use bucket brigades. Later, they developed hoses that, for example, they could put down a well and they'd suck water out of the well. Later, actually, Charlotte had pumps that they could hook up to. But the job, this guy's job is to get water into the fire engine. These people, and there would be two, see, there are people on the other side. You can hardly see him over there. He's over there. People on either side would be pumping up and down, up and down, up and down to pump that water on the fire. So now we know they had we know that they had a volunteer fire company, 1835, that had a fire engine by 1842. We also know that there was a second volunteer company because the town bought a second hand pumper that was used in a big fire in 1856. Now, this actually is 1776, but it shows kind of what was going on here. You know, there were three things, there were four things that were really involved. Here's your fire engine. See them pouring that stuff in there?
mm-hmm.
And there they are, pumping that sucker. Here's the guy squirting the water up, right? Now you'll hear a great deal of talk, and we'll show illustrations in a minute, of hooks. You hear about a hook and ladder company. One of the things to fight a fire is not only to squirt water on it, but you've got to go to the source of the fire. You've got to get into the building. You've also got to rescue people out of the building. Now, this would be a very typical situation where frame buildings no more than 2 stories high. That's basically what Charlotte was. Now, you can see these ladders are crucial to let the firemen, A, rescue people, and B, to get into the fire itself. Now, the hook, let me see if I can, here's a hook. A hook, I'm going to go back. The hook is just a stick with a big metal prong on the end of it. You use it for all kinds of things. You can punch doors open with it. You can pull walls down with it. Believe me, every fireman spends a lot of time learning how to climb a ladder and how to use a hook.
Even still
So,
now, right?
huh?
Even now.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Hooks and ladders and fire engines were fundamental to the whole fighting of a fire. But that's basically that's how they did it. That's how they did it. And even with this, if they had a big wind, they're in big trouble. Now, you know, this was a huge fire that occurred on the 27th of May, 1856. And it threatened to burn up the whole blooming town. It erupted it says nearly all the buildings were of wood and very combustible material. And it says here at the bottom of this paragraph over here, at the height of the conflagration, it threatened destruction to a large and valuable portion of the town. And look how they control the fire. Thanks are also due to Misters Huggins and Hardy for a large quantity of powder promptly furnished for demolishing houses to stop the progress of the fire. So they literally had to blow the houses up. In other words, you had to build a fire break. And this fire in May 27th, 1856, scared the willies out of the town. Luckily, nobody died.
That is lucky.
Very, very fortunate, but it was a shocking event. It just absolutely terrified the town.
Do you know about how many buildings were destroyed, or?
I don't, except I know it was substantial. There's no record in the newspapers of that. Now, as a result of that fire in May of 1856, the citizens said, look, you got to buy more ladders, you got to buy more hooks, and you got to get us a better fire engine. Because one of the fire engines, when they brought it out to fight that fire in May 1856, it didn't squirt very well. And they were just, well, the town responded. Now they bought, in 1857, this is not the actual fire engine, but it's a picture of one just like what they bought, because they bought it from the John Agnew Pumper Company, but they got this, and it was definitely a better engine, but it too was unreliable. Sometimes it worked better and other times it worked. And you see, unlike the other piano style, this one was pumped by men standing at the end. And they gave this fire engine a nickname, Crazy Hannah.
Okay.
So what they're doing, they're trying to get more ladders, they're trying to get more hooks, they're developing more, they're getting more fire engines, they're having more volunteer companies. So they're trying to improve their ability to fight a fire. Because you made the point so excellently that it was so terrifying to people. How much time have I consumed?
Oh, you've been talking about 32 minutes.
Oh, Jesus. Well, anyway.
We knew you wouldn't get through.
Now, the next stage of improvement was to use steam. Because you see, the thing that you want to do is to have power to throw water. And those men could sit there like hogs, sweating on those hand pumpers. But the reality was they just couldn't throw water very far. And so the next step was to get for the city. Remember, the city bought these equipment. For the city to buy a steamer, which they did in 1867. Now, here was the deal with the steamer. You actually had a boiler on the fire engine. Now, you still had to bring water to it, but you had a boiler that already had water in it. You just had to replenish. Ain't nobody going to be able to pull that boiler. It's too heavy. It'd take you too long to get to the fire. So this is when they introduce horses. Horses become the means of hauling a fire. And you can see the Hornet Steam Fire Engine Company #1. They got another steam fire engine sometime in the 1860s and early 1870s. The Pioneer Steam Fire Engine Company #2. And they have an independent hook and ladder company. So they've got 3 separate volunteer fire departments that are responding to fires by the 1870s. Okay. Now, this is the next story is there's Pioneer Steam Fire Company, and here they are. Now, by the way, there was a fire chief who was a city employee. Remember, these are all volunteers. His job basically is to coordinate these, to make sure they do proper training, to make sure that they maintain proper discipline, they have organization and so forth. And here's a wonderful picture, and it's no better than the original, of the Hornet Steam Fire Company number one, which was number. I think it's number one.
It says number one in the picture.
Yeah, it should be changed to number one. Now this is almost worth a separate story, and I know I'm not going to be able to get through with it, but I'm going to do what I can. Prior to the Civil War, there were no black firemen. All firemen were white people. But after the Civil War, with emancipation, and with the presence of Union troops in Charlotte until 1877, and congressional reconstruction going on, there was an African-American volunteer fire company organized, and which was recognized by the city and which got equipment. And their original name was the Yellow Jackets. Now, they were formed sometime in the early 1870s. We know that from this Western Democrat article of May 20th, 1873, we know that the Yellow Jackets were formed by that time. Now, this is a story in itself, and it's a great story. This is really interesting.
Are you going to try to tell it today, or
I'm gonna
start?
I'm gonna start, and when I finish, when you tell me I got to stop, I'll stop.
Well,
I can tell this part of the story.
okay.
You remember we were talking about Myers Park?
Yes.
Remember our podcast on Myers Park? And you remember Jack Myers, who was the guy who really got all that going? Remember?
Mm-hmm.
His daddy was W.R. Myers.
Okay.
And W.R. Myers had a big mansion on East Trade Street. And basically, this appeared in the Charlotte Observer on the 20th of April, 1875. And what it is, it's a card of thanks. The Yellow Jacket Fire Company, all black, are thanking Mr. Myers because he made a, don't worry about the telephone, that's part of life. He made a $100 contribution to the Yellow Jacket Fire Company. The reason was that they saved his house from burning up. Now, there are two things to say about that I'm intrigued by. First of all, let's talk about what this meant for colored people, as they were called at that time.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Black people, African Americans. You know, there was tremendous feelings of racial anxiety. Many blacks were subjected to public ridicule and scorn. Not by everybody, but by some. Well, you know, Mary Dana, if your house is burned up, you don't care who the fireman is that comes to your blooming house, you know?
That's
Who
right.
cares, right? Who cares? Well, these Yellow Jackets really earned the respect of the white community because the fire engine that they used was Crazy Hannah, the one that the city had bought in 1857 that was so unreliable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the city let the Yellow Jackets use that fire engine because the whites didn't want it. Well, even though they had an unreliable fire engine, they did a terrific job putting out fires. In fact, they were fast, they were quick, they were efficient, they were organized, they got everything done, and they saved W.R. Myers' house from burning down. Well, that allowed blacks to have a sense, especially males, especially young men, to have a sense of affirmation at a time when sometimes that was not easy to acquire. But the other thing I would say about this, which is, I cannot prove this, but you might remember, I don't know if I've said it before, W.R. Myers gave the land for the campus of what's now Johnson C. Smith University. And you cannot help but believe that he was influenced by the fact, and he was known to be very sympathetic to blacks. And you know, his son was the one who basically built Cherry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I can't help but infer, I can't prove, that part of the reason was W.R. Myers was so grateful to these Yellow Jackets for saving his house from burning down in 1875. And the story of the Yellow Jackets that renamed themselves, for reasons that I'll talk about next week, the Neptunes. And that volunteer fire company lasted until 1905. It's a terrific story of African American history in Charlotte, and I'll concentrate a good bit on that next week. Talk about what happened, how it evolved, and then we'll start getting into the history of the Charlotte Fire Department itself. Now, Mary Dana, how am I doing on time?
You are out of time.
God bless everybody.
You talked
I
about
hope you found it
over
interesting.
42 minutes.
I hope you
I
found it.
did. I did. I know it's hard to find illustrations or anything of that early time period. I noticed.
Very difficult.
Right. So, but it's important. And again, something that we tend to take for granted now that we need to remember was a major threat.
Firemen are generally loved by everybody.
That's true. And we need to appreciate them and not take them for granted.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, thanks, Dad. And we'll continue on next week. And thanks, everybody, for being with us today. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.